Fair housing groups throughout Massachusetts are responding to new signs of discrimination against renters. This follows testing that shows discrimination against families with children in connection with lead contamination. To talk about the problem and the push for remedies is our guest, the executive director of the Fair Housing Center of Greater Boston, Bob Terrell. Thank you very much for being with us, Bob.
Thank you for having me, Chris. It's been quite a while since I've seen you.
All right, well, thank you. Good to have you back. This is a new twist on what's really an old story. We've been hearing about this for years, that people with kids have trouble getting an apartment because the landlord says, we got lead here, we can't rent to you. So what's new with this now?
Well, like you said, it's an old problem, but we're seeing a lot more of it, not just in the Boston area, but throughout the state of Massachusetts. And one thing I want your listeners to get clear on right off the bat, discrimination against families with children is illegal throughout the United States. It's illegal in Massachusetts, and the presence of lead paint is not a legal defense against discrimination. So my message to landlords throughout the state is, when you have an opportunity and the resources, get the lead out.
So what should a tenant do? Because, what should you say? If a landlord or an agent for a landlord says that to you, well, what's the next step?
Well, one of the things you could do is ask for documentation that there's actually lead in the apartment. If you go to rent an apartment and sign a lease, that's a condition of the leasing process, is that they give you certification that the apartment's been inspected, and if it's been inspected and de-leaded, what level of de-leading has occurred. So you could ask for that documentation. But at any time in any kind of real estate transaction, whether you're renting an apartment, buying a house, financing your home, or insuring your home, if you think you've been discriminated against, call us immediately. Because for many of our protected classes, it's probably a 2/3 chance that you have been discriminated against.
Now, fair housing groups, yours included, have been calling for action because there was testing that confirmed this kind of discrimination. Tell me a little bit about what people have been going through.
Well, we've just in general seen a real increase of discrimination against families with children because of lead paint, because some folks are survivors of domestic violence. Some landlords simply do not want young children in their building for one reason or another. So we just decided as a group, we're part of a group called the Statewide Fair Housing Coalition. We just decided to get together and file all of our most relevant cases at the same time at the Massachusetts Commission Against Discrimination, deliberately to draw more attention to this problem.
And if I'm not mistaken, I think one of the people you're concerned with is a family that's been looking for several months for an apartment, I think?
Oh, that's not uncommon, that folks will look for several months to find a place, particularly if they're a Section 8 voucher holder. They also have a very, very difficult time finding a place to live.
Now, I know, again, this is another one of the old stories out there, that there are these things, these sort of received wisdoms or urban legends, whatever. Someone says, oh, you don't want to rent the Section 8 because of the nature of the payment. But I guess that's also, that's a no-no.
That's a no-no. The source of the income should not be an issue. The only issue is, can the person pay on time and pay the full amount? The source of the income, we also, not just Section 8 voucher holders, we even have veterans coming home from war receiving veterans benefits that are being discriminated against.
So now that you're all taking this action, getting the state to go another way, what would you like to see result from this?
Well, we're hopeful that our cases that we filed at MCAD will result in a probable cause finding, and we'll be able to resolve those cases and send a word to our friends in the real estate industry, whether they're landlords, developers, property managers, that this kind of discrimination is not going to be tolerated in Massachusetts.
I'm talking with Bob Terrell from the Fair Housing Center of Greater Boston. I want to talk about the property owner perspective a little bit, because I remember at a time, the situation is we had all these old houses, old paint, lots of lead, and totally getting rid of it was very expensive. But nowadays, I guess maybe you can meet the requirement for safety by containing lead.
Yes, and there are some state and local funds available to homeowners if they would like to get a grant to help them de-lead. And we're not insensitive in the fair housing community to their plight. We have put forward legislation in the legislature that would provide them with a tax credit twice as much as they're getting now as an incentive for them to de-lead their homes. We're going to have to refile that legislation come January because it didn't get passed in the past year and a half. But we're also trying to get the state to use the federal standards for what we define as lead poisoning, which would cover more children throughout the state.
To put this problem into the context of the housing market, you've seen a lot of changes in your time in Boston. I imagine with the displacement, the gentrification going on, that must be putting a bigger squeeze on all this.
Yes, as a matter of fact, we have testified before the Boston City Council on at least 2 or 3 occasions in the last year and a half, making it very clear that if we don't do something about providing more affordable housing for people of all income levels, and gentrification and displacement continues at the level that it's taking place right now, we're going to end up with a resegregated housing market. We can already predict where folks are going to move to. And right now, the greater Boston area is ranked number 7 in the country in terms of the amount of segregation we have in our housing market. That really needs to change.
Well, I want to refer you to another piece of long history here. We depend on the federal government for a lot of support of affordable housing, and occasionally there's some unfairness in access to that as well, and I guess there are some new assessments coming down the road.
Yes. Back in July of 2015, HUD promulgated a new regulation. We refer to it as the Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing Regulation. What cities and towns are required to do when they apply now for their CDBG funds, home funds, emergency shelter grants, they must write an assessment of fair housing and submit that to HUD as a part of their application process. In the past, these documents were ignored by HUD. They sat on a desk somewhere gathering dust. But over the past 4 or 5 years, HUD has gotten more aggressive about enforcing this and making sure that municipalities are using federal dollars in a way that would help to desegregate their housing markets and take proactive steps to help people who are protected class members overcome those fair housing barriers. And the Fair Housing Center is working with a coalition of groups. We just met with the city about a week and a half ago to start having a dialogue with them about this process.
We should mention, of course, you're always looking for input from people who are living with these problems, but if someone has a problem right now and they want some help, they can also get in touch?
Yes, 617-427-9740, extension 102. Call us right away if you have a fair housing complaint, or you can go to our website, www.bostonfairhousing.org.
Right, thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you, Chris.
Bob Terrell from the Fair Housing Center of Greater Boston. We'll have more news in just a moment.